Now, it's very interesting. When I was looking at the topic for Sabbath school for today, and I saw that it was about light and darkness, and how the light coming from God conquers the darkness that comes from Satan, and the darkness that he wants to keep us in. I thought, today we must focus on a lesson about blindness in the scripture, because what better way of understanding the difference between light and darkness, between being able to see and not being able to see, than by looking at the story of someone who is experiencing that on a daily basis, someone who has experienced what it means to live in darkness, in blindness, and how Jesus was able to bring light to his life. And I didn't even realize that about 2 months ago, we looked at the story of another blind man in John chapter 9, because it was such an important story to go together with the Sabbath school lesson on that day as well. And I would have scheduled them one after the other, but so it happens that today we are looking again at a different situation, and trying to make sense of what happened on that day. Because being blind, especially in those days, was not something that you were very positive or hopeful about. I want you to think about, go back to a time in your life, or maybe even now, when you really felt hopeless, a time when you felt that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Well, some people might think about a time when they went to the doctor and they were told that they might have a condition that will be with them for the rest of their life, or might even lead to death. Well, in that situation, what we can do is turn to God, turn to prayer, ask people to pray for us. There is some sort of hope that healing could come. For some people, it might be a day when they came home and they realized that their spouse has decided to make other plans. And even in that situation, as heartbreaking as it can be, some people say there's plenty of fish in the sea, right? I met a lady a few years ago. Um, she was only 89 years old, and she told me, Pastor, I've been by myself for a while, but I'm still looking for a husband. People say that's not the end of the world, because there are plenty of fish in the sea. Maybe some people are grieving because of the loss of a spouse, of a parent, or of even children, of dear friends, of siblings. Well, whenever we lose someone, the Bible and the people who come to support us tell us that there is hope, that there will be the morning of the resurrection, that Jesus is coming again, and that death as we know it is not something permanent. Maybe some of us never went through these situations that are really challenging and torturing for us. Maybe it was about a bad grade we got in school. I remember when I got my first bad grade, and I was afraid of what will happen when I go home and I tell my family about it. I had no idea what will happen, but I was just terrified of having to tell them that I got a bad grade. But my teacher encouraged me and said, you know what? You still have time to get other better grades, and the average at the end of the term can still be okay. You don't have to be discouraged and disappointed by just one event. With a lot of the situations that we can think about in our life, when we felt hopeless, when we felt lost, when we felt that there is nothing good coming our way, we can always find something to encourage us. We can always find a way to be strengthened and just go forward to the next event. But for a person who experienced blindness 2,000 years ago, or even before in ancient Israel, that hope was not there. Because if you were blind, it was considered a punishment from God. And you know, when God punishes, who can take that away? We have in Exodus 4, verse 11, one of the foundational passages that was used by people in those days. Exodus 4:11. Then the Lord said to him, who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now imagine you were living in Israel and somebody who was blind came to you, and these words of this verse came to your mind. What would be your assumption? That God made this person blind. And we know that God doesn't change his mind, which is a good thing when it comes to salvation. But it's not such a good thing when you feel you are punished by God. We also have 2 Samuel 5, verse 8. 2 Samuel 5, verse 8, David said on that day, whoever would strike down the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, those whom David hates. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. David hates the lame and the blind. So God punishes David, who is one of the most important people in the history of the nation, has a problem with blind people. And obviously he has a problem with them because he sees them as punished by God as well. So what am I, a normal person, the average person in Israel, gonna believe about blind people? When we don't see that attitude changing over time, because in the New Testament, in the times of Jesus, we go to the first two verses of John chapter 9, the chapter that we used last time we spoke about a blind person. And in John chapter 9, it says that as he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So let me ask you again, just to make sure that you got it. Why was a person considered blind in the times of Jesus? Punishment from God for his or her sins, or for his or her parents' sins. Now imagine if your parents were so bad that God has to punish you to be blind forever. It means that they've done something very serious. And God will not change his mind, definitely. So someone who experienced blindness was someone who was going through a daily torture without any hope. You couldn't hold a job. What kind of job could you do? It's difficult enough these days when the government says that no matter what your condition is, you still have to work. But let alone in those days when work was mostly manual and hard. But not only that, who would want to mingle with someone who is such a bad sinner that God had to punish them with blindness? We know so many times when Jesus was eating with tax collectors and with sinners, with prostitutes, people of Israel were looking down on Jesus, saying, well, how can he claim to be coming from God and have anything special about him when he spends his time with these people who even God doesn't give any hope to? So life was hard. You would wake up every morning and you would try to somehow find food for the day to survive and just make it for another day until the end, whatever the end looked like. And what's very interesting is that while Israel took blindness as being God's punishment, there was a blessing coming from other nations. Because in Greece, for example, being blind was considered a virtue. And there were people who were looking upon those who were blind as being blessed by God, because they understood back then what we also know today, that when you lose one of your senses, your other senses are heightened. So the gods wanted you to achieve something great, so they thought there's no point in you seeing, because that would only waste your potential, your ability. And it's amazing when you think about it, and you think about how Israel have just closed off their mind and their understanding of life and how God works. And they said, no, that's it. This is the end of it. But other nations actually were more compassionate and were able to see beyond someone's condition, to see them as human beings. So thankfully, for the blind man we're going to speak about today, and for other people who had other disabilities in Israel, Israel was the best placed nation in the world. Now, it was not the most prosperous nation, because there were and there still are a lot of mountains, and it didn't have the green grass of Egypt or of India or other places. However, it was a central point where wherever you wanted to get to, whether it was Asia or Africa or Europe, you had to go through Israel. And because of that, there were a lot of people from other countries, other cultures, other nations who were spending a lot of time in Israel. Now, that's another sermon, another story about how God placed Abraham in the promised land, not just for him, but for the whole world. But that's a different story. But the blessing for the people who were being misunderstood and misinterpreted and rejected in Israel was that you had all these other people from other nations coming through Israel, and they saw something else. So you would try somehow to get in the way of someone who was not from your own household in order to survive. The story today is happening in Jericho. And Jericho was one of these places that was blessed with a lot of visitors, tourists, and business. There were a lot of exports going from Jericho to all over the world. So this man that we're looking at today, I'm sure he was going out every day somehow, hoping to meet one of these strangers who would have mercy on him and help him to get over another day. But it was just survival for one day at a time, because there was no hope of his condition improving. There was no hope of his condition changing in any way. But this one day, he goes out. He's positioning himself at the gate of Jericho, because obviously you want to catch people who will have mercy on you, either before they go into the city or after they come out of the city. You can't go in the marketplace because they're busy with their own stuff, with their own business. You might not catch their attention when you're there. However, if you're in front of the gate, it's impossible for them to ignore you. So Bartimeus, son of Timaeus, is by the side of the road, just before the gate, and he is ready to see what will happen that day. And we come to our verse 46, if we can put it back on the screen. Now they came to Jericho, and as they went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. Now, when I read this first verse, I realize that Mark is telling us a story about the blind man. He's not just telling us what happened on a specific day, what amazing things Jesus did. No. Mark is trying to tell us, to send us a message about this blind man specifically. Because it says, well, Jesus arrived to Jericho, But don't be concerned about what he did in Jericho. I'm going to tell you what happened after he came out. So they came to Jericho, and as he went out of Jericho, blind Bartimeus sat by the road begging. Now, if you're a blind person and you are waiting there by the side of the road for something to happen, I've already mentioned about the heightened senses. So you can't see, but you can hear. You can feel. If the earth under you is trembling, you can feel it. So on that specific day, instead of having one person or a group of people coming out of Jericho, Bartimaeus must have heard a big commotion, because there was Jesus, there were his disciples, and they were never alone. Wherever Jesus was, there was always a crowd. So you can imagine that Bartimaeus, as he was sitting there, he was feeling the footsteps of everyone who was walking past him. He could hear the loud noise of many voices, and he probably asked someone, "What's going on?" And somebody told him. So when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." It was impossible for even a blind person not to hear about Jesus by that time. We are in Mark 10, and obviously a lot of events happened all over Israel. So word went around that Jesus is the man who, even when there is no hope, he can give hope. Even when you felt for donkey years that there is nothing better coming your way, well, Jesus can give you something better. So naturally, this man is trying to hold on to the only hope that he has left. And he wants Jesus to have mercy on him as well. Did Jesus want to have mercy on him? Of course. But just like the people of Israel put themselves between God and those who were suffering, and told them that the avenue to get to God is shut because God punished you, God doesn't care about you, it's better that you weren't born in the first place. In the same way, we encounter a group of people surrounding Jesus and stopping Jesus doing what he came there to do in the first place. Then many warn him to be quiet. These were Jesus' disciples. These were the people who have come from their own backgrounds. Do you know what Peter was doing before he followed Jesus? He was a fisherman. He couldn't even have dreamed about having all the knowledge about God that he acquired being with Jesus while he was on his boat. Do you know what Matthew was doing before being Jesus' disciple? He was a tax collector called Levi. And you know what? Levi, as a tax collector, was rejected by everyone around him because he was seen as a traitor. But Jesus gave him a new statute. He said, leave that. God calls you today. Follow me. We have others among Jesus' disciples who have had very troubled lives before, and they should have been in the best position to understand what Jesus would want to do with this man who is suffering by the side of the road. But instead of saying, please come, the master will see you now. The teacher will, maybe he will have mercy on you. Maybe he will help you to see again, because he has definitely helped us to see again. And a lot of people around Israel, they tell him to be quiet. Because so often we forget where we've come from. So often we forget what God has done for us. How often do we go back and say, Lord, I thank you that when I was going through that situation, you had mercy on me and you helped me to overcome. How many times do we go back and say, Lord, I was actually struggling with this addiction, with this habit, with this problem. And I prayed, or someone prayed for me, and here I am, free. How many of us actually reflect on what God has done for us in our life? How far we have come thanks to Him? And if we do it, what do we do with it? Because these people, they went through a lot. Jesus came and helped them, got them to be free, and they forgot about it. And it happens in churches more often than we would like to, where we forget that the same way God looked for us and brought us to that place, He's looking for other people right now as well. And my story can be the story that brings someone out of their own situation. Because sharing our testimony has a tremendous potential that we don't often realize. It's not only about us being saved and being safe in between four walls, but it's about using our testimony to do even greater good. As I said earlier, Abraham was called to come out of his father's house, and geographically, that was a good place to be in. And God said, no, go to the place, to the country, to the land that I will show you. And there, I will bless you. Don't worry about geography. Don't worry about climate. Don't worry about anything. I will bless you. But I want you to be a blessing as well, because I want many nations to come out of you. So what do I do with my testimony? What do I do with what God has done for me? Do I use it? Do I lead others to come to experience the same? Or do I just come and sit down in church once a week and tell everyone else around me who are still looking for God, be quiet, because I'm in a good place and God has to spend a lot of attention for me? But you see, when you are in a desperate situation where you've lost all hope and there is just one flicker of light that could take you to a different place, to a different life, you don't care about the people who want to stop you from getting to your hope. So the verse, Ashley, can we get it back, please? As people were telling Bartimeus to be quiet, he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. You see, this was Bartimeus, but not everyone is Bartimeus. Some people are too scared to do it like Bartimeus. Some people see the rejection, and the rejection makes them to give up hope altogether. The rejection makes them look at the God that the people who claim are following him, the way he is portrayed through their life, and they say, no, I don't want anything to do with this God. I don't want anything to do with your religion, because I'm looking at your life and I don't see any God there. But Bartimeus was strong. Son of David, have mercy on me. And what happens now is very interesting, because Jesus is, of course, he wanted to help and heal Bartimeus, but he cannot do that without teaching his disciples and the crowd a lesson. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. What does that mean? That he told the same people who rejected him earlier to go to Bartimeus and bring him to him. Now, don't imagine that the road leading into Jericho was the M25 with 4 lanes on one side and 4 lanes on the other side. And Jesus was not able to project his voice to make sure that Bartimeus hears him if he calls. Remember that Jesus preached on a mountain to 5,000 people. Jesus was able to project his voice. He didn't need a microphone. But Jesus is asking the same people who pushed the man aside to humble themselves and go and call this man to come to Jesus. So they called the blind man, saying to him, what did they say to him? Oh, be of good cheer, rise, he's calling you. Look, if you didn't read the previous verses, you would think that these people are genuinely interested in helping the man, right? But no, that's hypocrisy in action. That's what it means to be humbled by God. Because when God humbles you, you don't really have a choice. And I've seen many people fall. I've been in situations where I thought very highly of where I was at that time. But God found ways to bring me back down. And I've always been challenged by that, because when I came to this country and I went to study at Newbold, for the first 2 years, God kept me just to survive. And it felt like every time things were starting to go a bit better, God would turn things around so I go back to survival. So I was having my arguments with God, and I said to him, God, why do you keep me on the survival line? I'm studying here. You brought me, that's a bigger story. You brought me to this place. You brought me to study here at Newbold. So why are you so tight with me? But then I realized that those 2 years were about God getting me to not consider any of my successes as my own. And every time I was close to falling in the trap of thinking that, oh, look, I've come from my country and I got here and I succeeded to do this and this and this, I was bringing too much light on myself and God was not coming through. But when God humbles you, you will feel it, but you have to accept it. These people were forced to accept it. So they go, be of good cheer, rise, he's calling you. But Jesus' lesson doesn't stop here. Let's go to the next verse. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? Didn't Jesus know what the man wanted? Everyone knew what the man wanted, right? You're not the blind man by the side of the road with the only hope you have to see and go to him and say, you know, can you spare some coins? You don't go and ask for a bag of rice. You obviously want healing. But this is still part of Jesus's lesson for the crowd around him. Because this man was in desperate need for the healing of Jesus. Jesus wanted to heal him because that was his purpose, that was his passion, that is what he wanted to do to everyone around Israel. But these people needed to hear from the man's mouth that Bartimeus wants healing. That's because we make assumptions. We make wrong assumptions about what other people are after. We don't trust one another. So we think, well, you know, this person is only coming to God because they think they're going to get something out of it. This man or this woman is only coming to church because they're looking for a husband or a wife. I've had people come to me to say, oh, you know, maybe you shouldn't baptize this person because they're only getting baptized to be able to marry into a family in church. We make assumptions. And the people around Jesus made assumptions about Bartimaeus. And Jesus wants them to hear with their own ears what Bartimaeus was after all along. He just wanted to see. And these men were stopping Bartimaeus from getting what he wanted and what he needed. His sight back. Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. That's all I want. He's not asking for anything else, is he? He's not asking to be received among the disciples. He's not asking for any honors. He's not asking for any riches. He's only asking for his sight. Because he knows that when you get that blessing, everything else can be taken care of. But the sight is what is needed. So Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. I like this last sentence because I said earlier, Bartimeus didn't ask for Jesus to receive him as one of the 12. He didn't even ask to be received as one of the 70 or one of the 120. He didn't ask for any special status. He just asked for his sight. And the moment he received his sight, what does he do? He follows Jesus. This is what this episode was about all along. People who are in need of Jesus, people who depend on the action of God in their life, and who, if introduced to God, would turn out to be followers. People who appreciate what God can do in their life, people who can appreciate the gift of God. And unfortunately, Bartimeus was very close to not receiving that. Because some people around Jesus thought to say, be quiet. Jesus doesn't have time for you. Some of us may be in need of that touch from God right now. We might need it because of something that we're experiencing, because of health, because of grief, because of a number of reasons. No one can stop you from accessing the power of God. No one can stop you from going to God, calling upon God, have mercy on me. Tell him what you need, and he will give it to you. But if you're not experiencing any of those things, then you're following Jesus already. Don't be a stumbling block for other people who are looking and who are in need of God. Because on this journey of life, we can be helpers, or we can be people who stand in God's way. I don't even want to hear Jesus saying what the consequences will be for those who are standing in his way. I want to be a helper. Do you want to be a helper? God has plenty of space for us to follow him and be a change in our life, in our immediate context, and in this world. May God bless us and help us to come out of our condition of blindness into the light and to lead other blind people to him as well. May God bless us. Amen. I want to invite you all to stand now as we will close our service.